Meredith Powell's day began like any other in Oakwood Terrace, with her morning patrol. Neighbors jokingly called her the general behind her back, but Meredith considered her vigilance a community service. Her house, positioned strategically at the neighborhood entrance, gave her a perfect vantage point to monitor all comings and goings. This Saturday morning, as she pruned her award-winning roses, 3 consecutive years at the county fair, Meredith spotted something unusual: a young man with wild hair and tattoos crawling along the sidewalk's edge. Not walking, but actually crawling, stopping every few feet to point an expensive camera at the ground. Her garden shears froze mid-snip. Was he casing houses? Planting something dangerous? The neighborhood kids had been complaining about missing packages lately. Meredith tapped her gardening watch, checking the time, 9:17 a.m. She'd document everything meticulously, as always. She set down her shears with military precision, straightened her Oakwood Community Watch vest, and activated the body cam she purchased after the great Halloween toilet paper incident of 2023. Whatever this suspicious character was planning, Meredith Powell was ready. The morning sun glinted off the silver whistle hanging around her neck, a whistle she'd blown exactly 695 times since moving to Oakwood Terrace. She kept a tally in her neighborhood incidents binder. Each blast had marked some violation of community standards: improper trash bin placement, unauthorized garage sales, children riding bicycles without helmets. Never mind that the HOA had repeatedly asked her to stop using the whistle after Mrs. Hernandez's poodle developed an anxiety disorder. Meredith considered her noise pollution a small price to pay for neighborhood vigilance. She crouched behind her prized hydrangeas, their blue blooms providing perfect camouflage for surveillance. Through the leaves, she studied the intruder more carefully. Mid-20s, she assessed. University hoodie, expensive camera that likely cost more than her monthly HOA dues. The young man was completely absorbed in whatever he was photographing, oblivious to being watched. That's how they get you, Meredith thought. They distract you with their supposed innocence before striking. Reaching into the pocket of her gardening apron, she retrieved her suspicious activity checklist, laminated of course, and began ticking boxes. Unfamiliar face, your private property. Unusual behavior, no visible identification. The evidence was mounting. The clipboard trembled slightly in her hands, not from fear, but from excitement. This could be her moment, the incident that would finally convince the HOA to install the security gate system she'd been proposing for the last 7 quarterly meetings. "Excuse me," Meredith's voice cracked through the morning air like a whip. The young man jumped, nearly dropping his camera. "This is private property. What exactly do you think you're doing?" Nearby, Mrs. Abernathy, who had been walking her Pomeranian, froze mid-stride. The Johnsons, who were loading golf clubs into their SUV, paused to watch. This was better than the neighborhood's shared Netflix account. "I'm just photographing these flowers," the young man explained, gesturing toward tiny purple blooms peeking through the grass. His calm tone only irritated Meredith further. "Do you have permission to photograph in Oakwood Terrace?" Meredith demanded, positioning herself between him and his subject. Her phone was already out, recording everything. Name, ID, purpose. The young man sighed and reached for his lanyard. "James Chen, County Environmental." "A likely story." Meredith cut him off, advancing a step closer. "I've lived here for 23 years, and I know every legitimate visitor. You weren't on any approved list I've seen." James tried explaining something about public easements and endangered flora documentation, but Meredith was already texting the neighborhood watch group chat. "Suas pesayos photographer CLA government stake US, possible IDNTITYTEF to operation. Corner of Maple and Elam. Backup requested." Within minutes, her phone pinged with responses from eager neighbors rushing to the scene of potential excitement. Meredith's heart raced as she mentally added this confrontation to her impressive statistics. This would be her 695th official incident report, a milestone she'd been anticipating for weeks. She'd even prepared a special red folder for number 695, decorated with gold star stickers she purchased in bulk from the teacher's supply store. "I'm going to need you to step back from those flowers while we verify your credentials," she announced, adopting her official Community Watch voice, precisely 2.5 octaves higher than her normal speaking tone. Years of neighborhood confrontations had taught her that authority was 10% badge. Her laminated Oakwood Watch ID card dangled prominently from a rhinestone lanyard and 90% vocal projection. James Chen looked around, seemingly confused about whether this was an elaborate prank. "Ma'am, I'm standing on a public sidewalk. These plants are within the county right-of-way, which extends approximately 12 feet from the center of the road." "I know every inch of Oakwood Terrace better than the developers who built it," Meredith countered, her right eye twitching slightly. "And I've personally maintained this strip of land since before you were born." She gestured to her gardening cart, which contained precisely 695 tools. Though she hadn't counted them herself, organization was important, but she wasn't obsessive. Thank you very much. Mrs. Abernathy's Pomeranian, Precious, strained at its leash, apparently fascinated by the purple flowers, or perhaps by the mounting tension. Meredith, Mrs. Abernathy ventured cautiously. Didn't Big mention something about this at the last meeting? Some environmental survey? Meredith shot her a look that could wither her prize roses. I think I would remember something like that, Glades. I've attended 695 consecutive HOA meetings without missing a single one. This wasn't strictly true. She'd missed the February meeting 3 years ago due to laryngitis, but she'd sent her husband with a recording device and 17 pre-written questions. The confrontation had drawn quite an audience. Meredith stood with arms crossed, flanked by her loyal supporters, mostly retirees with nothing better to do on a Saturday morning. She positioned herself strategically in front of the flowering plants, determined to protect them from whatever nefarious purpose this photographer had in mind. I've already notified the authorities, she announced loudly. She hadn't. Her relationship with the actual police had become strained after her 18th call about suspicious teenagers using the community basketball court. James Chen maintained remarkable composure, repeatedly showing his credentials and trying to explain his purpose. These purple cone flowers are incredibly rare in urban settings. Your neighborhood has one of the last natural colonies in the county. Did you hear that? Meredith gasped dramatically to her audience. He's admitted he wants to take our flowers. This is eco-terrorism. The crowd's reaction wasn't what she expected. Instead of rallying behind her, several neighbors exchanged confused glances. Meredith didn't notice the subtle shift in the crowd's energy. She was too busy calculating how many people were witnessing her moment of triumph. She counted quickly: 6 retirees from her watch group, 9 curious dog walkers, and 5 miscellaneous neighbors. 20 witnesses in total. Adding herself and the perpetrator made 22. She recorded this number carefully in her incident log, bringing the total number of witnesses to all her documented incidents to exactly 695. The symmetry was deeply satisfying. As per Section 14, Paragraph 3 of the Oakwood Terrace Community Guidelines, Meredith recited from memory, her voice carrying across the growing assembly. All research, photography, and specimen collection must be approved by the appropriate community channels. She'd authored that particular guideline herself during her brief tenure on the HOA board, before her unanimous removal following what neighbors still referred to as the Great Sprinkler Timing Dispute of 2019. The young photographer tried again. Ma'am, these flowers are Echinacea levigata, commonly known as smooth purple coneflowers. They're federally listed as endangered, with only about 695 plants remaining in natural populations across the entire state. Meredith's eyes narrowed. Was he mocking her somehow? How could he possibly know about her special number? She'd never told anyone about her fixation with 695, not even her husband, who had learned years ago not to question why dinner was always served at precisely 6:95 p.m. Dr. Eleanor Williams, who had been quietly observing from her driveway, finally stepped forward. The retired biology professor adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. Actually, Meredith, I believe this young man is part of the conservation project I mentioned at the last 3 HOA meetings. The meetings you said were, and I quote, a waste of time that could be better spent monitoring the neighborhood security cameras, added Bob from 2 doors down unhelpfully. Several neighbors nodded in agreement. Meredith felt her control slipping. According to the official survey, Richard continued, unfolding an official-looking document, your actual property line ends approximately 6 feet behind where you're standing. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. For years, Meredith had scolded neighbors for stepping on her grass, the very grass she was standing on now. That can't be right, Meredith sputtered, color rising in her cheeks. I've maintained this area for decades. Maintaining public property doesn't make it yours, Richard explained, with the barely concealed delight of someone who'd endured years of Meredith's corrections at HOA meetings. In fact, you've been landscaping over the protected wildflower habitat that Mr. Chen here is documenting. Meredith stared at the survey map in disbelief. The neat line marking her property boundary was unmistakable, exactly 6.95 feet from where she stood. The precision of that number seemed like a personal attack. Her mind raced through the implications. Had she really spent 23 years policing land that wasn't even hers? This survey must be wrong, she insisted, her voice rising. I have the original property documents from when we purchased in 1998. In fact, she had exactly 695 documents related to her home purchase, each one meticulously filed in acid-free sleeves and organized by date, importance, and potential relevance to neighborhood disputes. Richard adjusted his glasses. The county actually remapped this entire area last spring. We discussed it at the April 6th meeting. the one where you left early to confront the ice cream truck for excessive jingling. Neighbors who had arrived ready to support Meredith were now filming with their phones. Mrs. Abernathy's Pomeranian chose this perfect moment to lift its light on Meredith's prized rosebush, technically on public property. But I've issued exactly 695 warnings to people for walking on this grass. The number slipped out before she could stop herself. Several neighbors exchanged meaningful glances, so those threatening notes they'd received for grass trespassing had come from Meredith, not the HOA as she'd implied. The crowd murmured. Some laughed outright. Someone whispered, "Is she obsessed with that number or something?" The boundary revelation was devastating, but it got worse. Richard flipped to another page of his documents. According to the environmental assessment, this area contains exactly 695 individual protected plants across 6 endangered species. He glanced at James for confirmation. The botanist nodded. That's correct. We completed the inventory last month, and Mrs. Powell's enthusiastic. Landscaping efforts have actually created ideal conditions for several of these species. Meredith felt dizzy. Was the universe mocking her? The crowd had grown to at least 40 people, far more than the 22 she counted earlier. She would need to revise her witness count. James, sensing Meredith's humiliation, tried to defuse the situation. Your care of the area has actually helped protect the coneflowers. They thrive with certain types of careful maintenance. But the damage was done. Meredith's authority was crumbling before her eyes, and worst of all, 17-year-old Zoe Parker was live-streaming the entire debacle on TikTok. The botanical Karen gets schooled. By Sunday morning, Meredith couldn't escape her new identity. Botanical Karen Meltdown had amassed over 2 million views across platforms. Creative edits featured her voice over scenes from nature documentaries, and someone had remixed her, "This is private property," into a surprisingly catchy dance track. Local news vans parked outside Oakwood Terrace, hoping to interview the woman who had accidentally become the face of what not to do in conservation education. Meredith refused to leave her house, watching through the blinds as James Chen gave a thoughtful interview about the importance of native plant species, standing on what she had always considered her immaculate lawn. The story took an unexpected turn when the County Environmental Office announced a new initiative inspired by the viral video. Know Your Native Plants, a community guide to conservation. James Chen would lead educational workshops starting in Oakwood Terrace. Meredith received dozens of emails from neighbors, some mocking, some sympathetic, but most inviting her to attend the first workshop. Her phone buzzed with yet another notification. The HOA was calling an emergency meeting to discuss the neighborhood's unexpected fame and the conservation opportunity it presented. For the first time in 23 years, Meredith considered skipping an HOA meeting. Inside her immaculately organized home, Meredith sat surrounded by the remnants of her former authority. Her incident wall, a massive corkboard featuring 695 color-coded pins marking the locations of neighborhood violations, seemed absurd now. The spreadsheet tracking her 695 most serious confrontations with neighbors, landscapers, and delivery personnel mocked her from her computer screen. At precisely 6:95 p.m., her special time, her doorbell rang. She ignored it until the 6th ring, then reluctantly peered through the peephole. Dr. Williams stood on her porch, holding what appeared to be a plant. "I know you're in there, Meredith," the retired professor called. "I brought you something." Curiosity overrode humiliation. Meredith opened the door exactly 6.95 inches, just enough to speak through the gap without inviting entry. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to sound dignified despite her unwashed hair and neighborhood watch bathrobe. "Do you know what's fascinating about these purple coneflowers?" Dr. Williams asked, holding a potted plant with delicate purple petals. Their root systems form exactly 695 symbiotic relationships with beneficial soil fungi. It's a remarkable adaptation that helps them survive in tough conditions. Meredith blinked, suspicious. "Is this some kind of joke? Did Richard tell you about my preference for that number?" Dr. Williams smiled kindly. "Meredith, everyone has known about your fixation with 695 for years. We've all received exactly 695 emails from you with 695 words highlighting 695 different community concerns." She paused. "We thought it was just an odd coincidence until Richard checked the records yesterday." The mortification was complete. Meredith sagged against the doorframe. "So I've been the neighborhood joke all this time?" "More like a neighborhood curiosity," Dr. Williams corrected. "But right now, you're a neighborhood opportunity." She handed Meredith a tablet. On it was the trending hashtag #botanical695Karen, which had spawned 695,000 posts in just 24 hours. Most were mocking, but a surprising number foku. 3 weeks later, a hesitant knock interrupted James Chen's presentation at the Oakwood Tourist Community Center. The room fell silent as Meredith Powell entered carrying a large box. "I found these while cleaning out my garage," she announced to the stunned room. Inside were meticulously organized notebooks, 20 years' worth of detailed observations about local plant life, weather patterns, and seasonal changes in the neighborhood ecosystem. What everyone had dismissed as obsessive neighborhood surveillance was actually a treasure trove of amateur naturalist data. James flipped through the notebooks with increasing excitement. "This is incredible. You've been tracking the coneflower populations since before they were even classified as endangered." "I didn't know they were special," Meredith admitted. "I just thought they were pretty. I've been keeping them safe from the landscaping company for years. They always want to mow everything down." The transformation wasn't immediate or simple. Meredith still corrected people's garden techniques and complained about improper recycling bin placement. But her energy found a new focus. 6 months later, Oakwood Terrace hosted the county's first neighborhood biodiversity festival, with Meredith as the unlikely co-organizer alongside James. The festival's highlight, the dedication of the new community conservation area, formerly known as Meredith's Front Lawn, now officially designated as Powell Prairie Preserve. The bronze dedication plaque featured a QR code that linked to educational resources, and yes, to the original viral video that started it all. As visitors scanned the code, Meredith would smile and say, "Sometimes you have to be wrong in the most public way possible to find out what you're actually good at." And then she launched into a passionate explanation about the proper way to identify purple coneflowers, a lecture that for once everyone was genuinely interested in hearing. The dedication ceremony was scheduled for 6 to 9:05 p.m. Meredith had insisted, and exactly 695 attendees had RSVP'd. The county environmental department had printed precisely 695 brochures on endangered plant species, all featuring Meredith's detailed photographs on the cover. "Who would have thought?" James whispered to Dr. Williams as they watched Meredith guide a group of fascinated schoolchildren through the preserve, that botanical Karen would become the county's most effective conservation advocate. "I had my suspicions," Dr. Williams replied, smiling. "Anyone who counts the petals on every flower in their garden has the potential to be either very annoying or very helpful. It's all about channeling the energy." And channel it she had. Meredith now managed exactly 695 volunteer hours per month across the county's conservation projects. Her infamous phone, once used primarily for documenting neighborhood violations, now contained an app she helped develop that allowed citizens to identify and report endangered plant sightings. It had been downloaded exactly 6,950 times in the first week alone. The centerpiece of the Powell Prairie Preserve was a special section containing, naturally, 695 purple coneflowers, each one cataloged, measured, and monitored by Meredith herself. Her daily rituals remained as precise as ever, but now involved collecting soil samples instead of complaint forms. Richard Thompson, the HOA president, approached Meredith as she finished her tour. "The county commissioner is here. She wants to discuss expanding the conservation program to other neighborhoods."